Evening viewer, welcome to our Glory Globe TV. Yes, death, the absolute truth in our life. Death is a natural and necessary part of life, as Chris Packham explained in Earth. Even extinction has its upsides as it clears the way for new life. However, having a bunch of corpses lying around is a nightmare for disease spread. But fortunately, life found a way to take care of all the gooey stuff. Lecturer in forensics at the University of Kent, Dr. Devin Finguity, calls this the decomposition ecosystems. It is a sophisticated series of processes that takes a body and breaks it down until all that's left is a skeleton, a process known as skeletonization. Before we reach the neat and crucially non-contagious skeleton, there are all kinds of tissues that have to be taken care of. In an interview with the IFL Science for Curious Life, a virtual event connected to our e-magazine Curious, Finoti walked us through those processes, but a curious point he also raised is that death itself is not a single moment. Decomposition starts really soon after death, and one thing that means Dr. Devin Finoti just want to clarify is that death is not like a single moment. It is a cascade of reactions and processes that happens over time. What will typically happen is that the individual will lose consciousness and then they will proceed towards suppression of breathing and heart rate, at which point that will stop, or they might lose consciousness as a result of those two processes stopping. Either way, that is what we term clinical death. So that's the death that you can be brought back from. You can be reviewed multiple times if necessary. The problem is, once your heart stops pumping, once oxygen has stopped circulating, your cells only have so much oxygen available to produce their energy source, which is known as adenosine triphosphate, that is called ATP. Once the cell runs out of oxygen to produce ATP, it can go into anaerobic respiration and produce ATP that way. The problem with that is that it is a very energy efficient, that is called the inefficient process, and it generates lactic acid as a byproduct. So there is a limited period of time, and anyone who is gotten a major cramp while doing exercise knows all about this. Once the cell runs out of ATP, its cellular transport mechanism has stopped working, which means that it can no longer exchange with its extracellular environment. That means that the internal condition in the cell start to deteriorate. It becomes more acidic. That acidic starts to dissolve the lysosome within the cell, and once the lysosome wall breaks open, all of the enzymes and lysosomes that are inside it come out and they start damaging the cell. Eventually the cell will just rupture, and this is a process known as necrosis, and it is distinct from apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. That's because apoptosis is technically reversible, whereas necrosis is a non-reversible process. The problem then is that the cell spills out all of these toxins and lysosomes and things onto the extracellular environment, and that starts damaging the adjacent cells, which are also experiencing the same kind of internal states. So you get this cascade of cellular death. It happens first in the tissues that have the highest oxygen and the highest water content. So your brain, stomach, your lung, that kind of things, your brain would be the first one to really stop working because it takes 20% of the glucose that our bodies require. It is very energy demanding. That takes about 4 minutes. So from the time that your heart stops beating, you have got about 4 minutes until the brain cells start to die, and the process is also irreversible. Once a sufficient quantity of brain cells have died, that is when you will experience brain death. Beyond the report, Glory Globe TV.